Jason Senti, how's it going, my man?
It's going pretty well. Yeah, world's a little weird right now, but it's generally good.
How is it affecting Malta?
Um, COVID's been interesting in Malta. We're 60 miles south of Sicily, and so when things really kind of kicked off in Italy, we thought it was like pretty likely to become a pretty big deal here in Malta. But for the most part, the measures they've taken have, so far kept things under control, which is pretty amazing. I was, a bit concerned about it for a while. Of course, still am and concerned for the world. But for the most part, it seems like Malta's handled it really, really well, and started easing some of the measures today, actually. So they're starting to open certain shops and things like that. But I expect it'll be a very slow process and one that has a little bit of a give and take and, pull back a little bit, that kind of thing.
What do you think about the easing of restrictions? Because that, for me personally, this is like the most terrifying moment, because in the beginning, when everyone was just interacting normally and we knew that it was there was a certain ignorance for me to it. So I was still in Starbucks doing my thing. My wife's saying you shouldn't be there. I'm like, whatever, we'll be okay. Then you learn more about it, and then you lock yourself away. And then now, obviously, people are going to have to start getting back to work and mingling before there's a vaccine. And that to me is the most worrying time for me. How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, I agree. It's a stressful thing, and it's a tough one. I'm certainly not an expert on this at all, but we're all paying attention to it, and we'll have our own thoughts and our own kind of personal opinions on it, because we have to think about ourselves and other people in our lives. And yeah, I think the restriction easing is something that comes with a little bit of anxiety from my side, simply because I think I don't expect it to go smoothly. Like you said, we're going to be doing this without a vaccine. And from all I can tell, it's going to be one of these things where, you start slowly easing back into things. Hopefully people take additional measures. But there's a very good chance we're going to have to claw back some of that when things, go poorly. And of course, when we're talking about something as dangerous as this, things going poorly is a little bit scary. So, yeah, so I feel similar.
When we've got kids, especially when we've got kids as well.
Yeah.
Like, how old's your little one?
She's 2.
Yeah,
so my daughter else is 2, and yeah, of course it's a worrisome thing, right? You're no longer just thinking about yourself. That's the case anyway when you have other people in your lives, spouses, etc. But yeah, something changes when you have children.
Unbelievably so. We'll get to that bit later on, but we're going to rewind right to the beginning of Jason Senti's life. Where did you grow up, and how did that area of the world mark you, do you think, as a human being?
Yeah. So I grew up in Grand Forks, North Dakota, which is the Midwest in the U.S., basically very close to the border of Canada in the center of the U.S. And yeah, relatively small town, not tiny, population of like 50,000 people for the most part. When I was growing up, I think it's a bit more than that now, a little bit different. But yeah, still generally relatively small town life. And yeah, I had a good childhood, good upbringing, all that. In terms of how it marked me, that's a really deep question that I'm not really exactly sure how it impacted me. Outside of, I definitely have, these are very surface level things, but I have some kind of character traits or I guess like idiosyncrasies that are associated with Canadians. I apologize a lot. I think I'm, for the most part, very polite, that kind of thing. And I think that's, largely a Midwest U.S., northern type thing, as well as Canada. So there's always those aspects for sure. But in terms of that, I mean, yeah, typical American lifestyle, I guess, growing up until I got to kind of university level, and from there I ended up venturing out a little bit more.
It's interesting how you said that you had these kind of Canadian traits about being really polite, because that's what we're like in Britain, in terms of like always saying always apologizing to everybody. But when I think the first time I encountered Americans was when I went to Cancun on holiday. I had never met so many people so polite in all my life, but it sounded so inauthentic.
Yeah.
Right. Like it was like, this is not like real life. Do you know what I mean? It's like, is there a bit of that about you sometimes, when you kind of just like, you're not thinking and your habitual kind of like way of being is?
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. So, and I can definitely see how people who aren't used to that would interpret that as some kind of I guess way of being disingenuous. But I certainly do, just as an instinct, act very polite, I guess, and apologize before actually even thinking about, am I sorry about what happened, or do I think I did something wrong? It's just more my reaction is, this person is, I mean, I'm not even thinking it through linearly like this, but if I were to, it'd be just like, this person is upset about something, so let's start by making them feel a little bit less upset, I guess, and that can start that way, which is something that you do have to, that I have actually spent some time thinking about in the last, 10 years, and suppressing in certain moments. But for the most part, a lot of that stuff's just, immediate behavior. And I've heard that before too from British people. When I was 19, I did a study abroad in Leicester, England. Yeah. And one of the first things somebody brought up to me there, like in the, university dorms and stuff, was they asked me why I was saying thank you all the time, or why I was like apologizing for things. I can't remember what it was exactly. And not just me, it was asking just generically about Americans doing that kind of thing, saying, have a nice day, stuff like that. Like, why would you do that?
Calling people sir. That's another. Like when I grew up, sir was something you called your school teacher. You're like, not like people you just come across. I get in Starbucks sometimes. Like I walk into Starbucks and they're like, good morning, and how's your day today? And I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, that can't be right. Like, is that person really that happy, or are they just, is this part of the job? And I never know which. I do have a question for you though. Obviously, we all have our own subconscious way of just interacting and behaving. Okay. And yours is to be like really kind of like pleasant, really nice, kind of almost like apologetic, as we spoke about. But does that go deeper as well? Is it a part of you at a deeper level that is apologetic, that is a little bit kind of like, do you know what I mean? Like, is there a connection there with something deeper?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. And unfortunately, I'm exploring it kind of, maybe not exactly for the first time, but pretty close to for the first time on this call right now. So I don't have any sort of great answer for that, or any great introspective answer. It probably does in some way. I know, generally speaking, I'm pretty conflict adverse and a people pleaser to a certain extent. And I like the, there's like a social pressure of some sort that I feel pretty strongly about, and that, people being around me feel comfortable and happy to be around me, or, I have a desire to be liked, and some things like that. So it very likely could tie in to some of that, because the immediate feedback that you get when you're generally pleasant, and even not just pleasant, but trying to make things as easy as possible for other people, that feedback is going to be the type of feedback that I think I inherently seek. Where that comes from, I honestly don't know. I don't know why that's something about the way I am. I know my mom is very much that way. I think probably a pretty more extreme version than I am. My dad is to a certain extent, although he's more likely to be abrasive than my mom, but still. So it very well might just be upbringing and not necessarily some deep-rooted insecurity or whatever it might be, but it could be that too. I'm just not sure exactly what it is.
What I'm noticing a lot with these calls is there's a lot going on by osmosis. We're literally just, I just been downstairs having breakfast with my 3-year-old and I realized how much she picks up off me just by watching me. I don't even teaching her anything. She's just mimicking me. She's not even aware she's mimicking me. It's incredible how much influence our parents have over us. And we'll get to that a little bit, hopefully. But I just want to touch on something you just said about being a slight people pleaser and conflict averse. How does that translate in poker, particularly live poker?
Yeah, interesting. I think it's, for live poker, it's a positive in terms of, it's nice to play with people who are, fun to be around, right? And make you happy. And I think it should, if I ever were a consistent live poker player, which I never really was. I played professionally for just short of a decade, but I was never a live cash game or live tournament player as my primary part of my profession. Just stretches where I did that mostly at the World Series. But I always actually thought that is something that maybe would have worked out well for me if I were just somewhat fun to be around at the table. Or at least somebody who's actively thinking about that all the time, just because I have an inherent, feel an inherent social pressure when people are around me to, make sure they're having fun. So that should be a positive. it can be a negative, of course, in terms of, not wanting to upset people when you bluff them, or whatever it might be, or just when they lose big hands. I think that probably could be, if I had more of the, I guess, if I had a lot of the day in, day out playing live cash, this is something different, I guess. I maybe would have a harder time, tangentially related, a harder time like taking a lot of money off of people. Fortunately, a lot of my live play, not most, but at least half, was tournaments where it's a little bit different. People are, that's still there, but people aren't, losing money that they have on the table in that moment. So that could potentially be a negative. In terms of the like conflict avoidance and stuff, I think maybe early on playing live, it had an impact on how likely I was to kind of go for certain things. And certainly in live tournaments, sometimes there are spots where you don't necessarily mind if people are a little bit intimidated by you. Just because making people fold is a really positive thing in games with antes and small raise and bet sizing and things like that. So getting people to overfold is generally a really positive thing. And that wasn't something that I would have leaned into at all, being intimidating in a sort of way. I would have been, more or less the opposite. But that's just something that I really don't think it was a huge thing to overcome. Just like, because with poker very specifically, like the goals are so obvious and concrete and clear that there wasn't like a whole lot of gray area for me trying to interpret, what the best thing is or most important thing is. Like there was a clear poker strategy involved, and I came from the online realm. I was, for most of my poker career, not particularly concerned with like live reads and things like that. Yeah. So really in the end, like, even though you're making a whole bunch of very close decisions all the time, so in that way it's very gray, I still like it. Still, in most spots, I could come to a conclusion that I thought this was the best thing I could possibly do in any given moment with the information I have. And so to go against it because of some kind of social pressure or something like that would be something that would stand out to me a lot and I'd have a really hard time with. So I don't think it was something that helped me back too much.
Do you think there's a link between conflict and competitiveness? So like, I interviewed Seth Davis on A Hero's Journey the other day. We were talking about what Seth's villains are in his life. And Seth said, one of my villains is I'm just not really that competitive. Like, I don't have that killer streak within me to get to the, he's already playing like in the high stakes.
Course, yeah.
But he says to get that extra level, I need to work on being more competitive. Do you think there's a link there between avoiding conflict and competitiveness?
I don't think there is for me. Maybe there is, in that if I, were a little bit less agreeable and less conflict averse, maybe I would be even more competitive. But I'm very competitive, and have been for a long time. Not with everything. Like I know there's a lot of people who are very competitive and like always have to win at everything they do. I kind of feel that way about anything that I'm giving reasonable effort to, or that I think I can compete in. But there have been certain things in my life that I eventually, anyway, just had no problem not being good at. Just being like, okay, this is a thing I haven't put the effort into, or isn't something that is going to work out very well for me, even if I do. Like anything involving running, I've always been, even when I was in the best shape of my life, which was significantly better shape than I'm in right now, I was always just a terrible runner. And I accepted that from a pretty young age, and so that was going to be very limiting in terms of athletics that I could do. Now, I still, played sports and things, and even did into, even played softball and, adult league stuff until I moved to Malta 4 years ago. But I was very accepting of the fact that, I looked ridiculous when I was running. So there's aspects like that. But anything that is something that I am focused on trying hard at, something I think I can compete in, I'm extremely competitive. And I'm certainly always that way with poker, was that way with video games, and that way with whatever it is I'm competing against somebody with in any given moment, even winning arguments, sometimes to a detriment, of course.
What was Jason Senti like as a teenager? What were your personality traits like, and what were your struggles?
Yeah, so when I was an early teen, I definitely had some like pretty standard teen angst. I'd say like overall, I just was very lucky with sorry, I'm probably going to do this a few times. I have to control the airflow in here a little bit. But I was very lucky in terms of kind of how happy I was as a teenager. I certainly wasn't the coolest guy in school by any means. I was in a somewhat larger high school, I guess, like graduating classes of like 400 or something like that, I think. So probably 1,000 or a little bit more in the high school. But didn't feel like an outcast or anything either. And that was mostly had, a pretty wide social network, and specifically one group of friends that I was very tight with for a long time and still am tight with most of them. And so I was generally pretty happy through high school, which I know is a pretty lame answer and not the one most people give. But certainly early in high school, I, had some of the standard identity crisis, teen angst stuff. And most of, I'm thinking like age, that's even more kind of junior high, but 13 through 15. And largely that was like moving from most of my friends when I was younger than that. We all played sports, and that's what we did. And I was moving away from playing sports. I didn't play competitive sports in high school at all. And so like through junior high, I kind of shifted out of that. But most of my friend group from before that had continued doing that stuff. And I had shifted into music. It wasn't as much a conscious decision that, hey, I'm not necessarily great at this, but it was obvious with a lot of the athletic stuff, reasonable hand-eye coordination stuff. But once again, I couldn't run. So that was a pretty limiting factor. But I really got into music, specifically punk music at that age, and started playing guitar and doing some things like that. So I did, I had maybe a little bit of an identity crisis at that time, trying to find myself, and did some of the standard stuff with dyeing my hair and whatever, and learning to play guitar and doing all that stuff, and had a kind of a friend group, a transition group for about a year that I felt close to and connected with at that time for a short period. But really, like, it became pretty apparent that that wasn't my group of people. They were just a little bit more negative, and I can't think of a better word for it, but they were in a scene that I wasn't as happy with. And I'm a pretty naturally happy person. And so I was fortunate enough to stumble across a different group of friends, and still kept the music element, and eventually was playing in a band for a long time and that kind of stuff, and had that as part of my identity at the time, but had moved on to a different group of friends. And so, throughout the rest of high school, it really is a pretty boring story. Had, pretty long time girlfriend through a chunk of high school that we broke up near the end. I don't know. nothing too special there. I, for the most part, I didn't like school necessarily in terms of classes and all that stuff, but I didn't dislike it, and I did very well. I think partially because of kind of an inherent sense of responsibility that my mom specifically, but my parents had ingrained in me. So I didn't really it's funny to look back on, I didn't really care that much about what I was doing with schoolwork, but it was absolutely unacceptable to get anything wrong. So there's a version of competitiveness, I guess. So, and I don't ever, I've thought about this somewhat recently. I remember the first B I ever got in university, and this is like a very accidental subtle brag, I guess, but I don't think anybody cares what grades I got. So it's not intended to be that way. It's actually just something I've been thinking about myself, kind of, what's wrong with me, I guess would be the way to say it. But the first B I got in university at, I'd gone through all the AP level classes and everything in high school, and I just had never gotten anything lower than an A before. And so I was in some pretty advanced math classes as a freshman in university, and I, just probably partied a little bit too much and some things, and got 1B at the end of the year in differential equations. And looking back on that, who cares at all? But I mean, it was devastating. It was super, which obviously tough life, right? Like if that was, and up to that moment, that was one of the harder things that I had dealt with. And that obviously is, there's something to unpack there. Maybe I'll do someday with
what happened when you say devastating? What happened?
I mean, devastated is a little bit wrong, but okay, so a little bit of exaggeration.
What was going through your mind? Can you remember how it affected you? And
yeah, I mean, I just really just felt like a failure, which is, pretty ridiculous to think about looking back on it. But I had some expectation of perfection, at least in the things that I, like I said, the things I tried at, I guess, or the things that maybe had something to do with my personal identity. Even though, like in high school, nobody knew of me as like a smart kid or something like that. In fact, my wife and I went to high school together. We didn't date in high school. And she's told the story many times to people that until like we graduated from high school. Near the end, there were some like awards given out and stuff. She had no idea I even got good grades. And we had been friends for years. So I'm bringing that up simply because like I would, you could maybe argue that had something to do with my personal identity or something, that I got good grades, but it wasn't something I talked about. So I don't really know why. And the form it took was, I just felt like I screwed up, and that I owed it to people not to do that.
Did the pressure, I mean, you just said something at the end there that might reflect on this, but was the pressure all internal, or did you feel a pressure from external sources?
All internal.
All
Absolutely.
internal.
Yep. I had almost no pressure from, certainly none of my friends would have put any pressure on me for that. And my parents never put any pressure on me for grades, I think because they never had to, at least not that I recall. Maybe they did when I was very young or something, but yeah.
Did that pressure that you put on yourself when you was a kid to get so you're used to getting A's all the time, and then all of a sudden you get a B. How did you react then in terms, after you're devastated and you go through that, what happened to your grades beyond that point?
Yeah. So if I recall correctly, basically it was something that it was kind of bursting through a wall that maybe freed me a little bit. I now, like, there was no way to be perfect anymore of the way it was. I could never have had the 4.0 GPA. So I actually relaxed on it a little bit. I actually don't think I got a B in the following year, but I know the pressure had really come off at some point there after that. And I know I did in my junior and senior year.
I think it's an important question, because, and someone definitely think about it. It's good that you are thinking about it, because like when I hear Phil Galfond very openly talk about his Galfond challenge, he'll talk about that fixed. He's obviously got a very heavily weighted growth mindset. Me and Elliot Rowe were talking about this, but there's this fixed mindset part of him, which is like, and he's very open about it. If I'm not good at, if I think I'm going to be a failure at doing this thing, then I'm just not going to do it. Like, so it's almost like I'm sailing through school, and I'm getting good grades, and now it's getting a little bit tough. I just won't try, because at least I can just tell people that my natural talent, you know what I mean? It's like like this solver thing that he was going through. So like, is that element of putting that pressure on you when you're that age, has that helped you in your poker career in the same kind of sense?
Yeah. So whatever it is that causes me to put that pressure on myself for a lot of things, and it certainly comes with a fair amount of anxiety, just that kind of overachiever, high achiever mentality. I don't know exactly what the right term is for it, but that certainly comes with a lot of negatives, but it comes with some positives, right? I hold myself very accountable for a lot of things, and I push myself very hard in most anything that I care about, want to try. And so that's certainly applied to poker. I was pretty hard on myself in most spots in poker, and I think for the most part where I was in the ways that it was beneficial was probably in an incremental sense. If I played a session poorly, played a hand poorly, played a street poorly, and it was clear to me that I didn't take it easy on myself. I didn't move on easily. I have a pretty even temperament. So fortunately, like, I didn't necessarily go off on crazy tilt or anything like that. But I was very quick to quit. If anything, like, some mindset coaching would have been a good thing for me, certainly. Now that's something, I mean, not that it didn't get attention before. Phil's been doing it for years. But it wasn't something that maybe has gotten as much attention as it has lately, especially with Phil talking a lot about his experience with Elliot Rowe and Masterclass. But any case, what I was fortunate in that when I was relatively even keel like that, I would quit, but it meant I didn't play as much as I could. But I was still, very hard on myself, and then would go away from that. And even if I wasn't the best studier. Even if I didn't take that and use that to study twice as hard away from the table, I punished myself psychologically to prevent myself to make mistakes like that again in the future, I suppose. And it was, I think, through a lot of incremental things like that, just not accepting, at least making mistakes that I could have easily prevented. or maybe not even easily prevented. Like I also would get quite upset when I'd find myself in a whole lot of spots that I really had no idea what to do, but I should. I love being in spots where I don't know what to do, and I think most of my opponents don't either. That's my favorite poker in the world. That's where I was successful as a poker player. But spots where I should know more than I do, and I think my opponents are significantly more prepared than I am, I would get upset myself about
Does that point to, you know, like is that an attitudinal thing?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, it's just it's yeah.
I can imagine. Sure. I can imagine poker can take it down that road. It took me down that road because if you're not paying attention to it and you're just getting lucky along the way, which I did probably when I was playing poker, you're never gonna develop that introspection in a way that you obviously did, where you really are analyzing what the hell is going wrong, right or wrong, and making adjustments along the way. So,
you know, I thought I was getting lucky playing poker for far longer than I should have. Now, of course, I did get very lucky playing poker. There's no doubt about it. I made the November 9 one year. Like that's luck boxing. I did not play nearly enough tournaments and certainly not enough main events at the World Series to have that be a reasonable expectation for my live tournament career. But I did actually think that I was, you know, I had a pretty solid track record playing online cash games for a pretty good period of time, well before I really accepted that, you know, it was clear that it was skill. Like I just always had like a fair amount of lingering doubt. Like at first it was just, wow, I'm running really good. This is awesome. But I kept working at it. And then eventually thought it was pretty likely I was quite good, but you know, I didn't know, I always had in my head that it was like 10% shot that I was just like superheatering, you know, and just always had to reflect back on it and try and identify what I was doing well. And I did a lot of the learning early on for me in my poker career, kind of by myself. And so I think one of the things that helped a lot with some of that confidence was then talking to other people eventually and developing some of those relationships and poker friends and finding that they thought in a lot of the same ways. And these were people that I respected a lot.
I can see how the really amenable, like welcoming, nice kind of like party personality, which we started off the call with, can link to you having a real kind of more of a pessimistic outlook on whether or not you're running good or not. Whereas someone like me, who is more brash, more egoic, is kind of like going to be more on the optimistic, I just think I'm fucking brilliant type side. So I could see the really positives. As a parent to a young daughter, right?
Yeah.
As a young daughter, what is it about your own teenage years, especially, and your experiences when you was a teenager? And we're not into parent bashing because all of our parents just did the best job as they did, as we're trying to do the best that we can. What is it? How would you parent your daughter? What would you do differently? I mean, say do differently. I'm telling you, but how are you going to prepare? How has your life prepared you for the discussions you're going to have with your teenage daughter, which you never were a recipient of?
It's a good question. It's a deep one as well. You know, there's a lot of things that I learned from my parents that I absolutely will or have prepared me in a lot of very positive ways for how to parent Elsie, and especially, you know, when she gets into her teenage years and stuff like you said. You know, this is starting on the praising parent side, but you know, my mom provided an amazing example for me all the time, day in, day out. Ridiculous work ethic, extremely nice, very accomplished in terms both professionally and academically, and as a parent as well, a mother of three. She's amazing. And my dad on the other side is also just a wonderfully intelligent, charismatic guy who you know, is very, very caring and gave me a lot of pretty impactful advice over the years, or maybe even just kind of a few things. But the reason I kind of started going here is I was thinking about, and this is odd, having a daughter a little bit, but one of the things my dad instilled in me was to not let fear be something that stands in the way of what you're going to do. And I think that's a lot easier to do with a son, at least in the traditional kind of paradigm. But without, I guess I can go into the details a little bit. It feels like it's a weird story to tell, but when I was like a really little kid, I remember going home after I don't know how old I was, but I couldn't have been much older than 6 or 7 years old or something, and going home crying after a kid pushed me and my other friend around, and he was a bit of an older kid, and I went home crying about it, and my dad basically told me to go back out there and fight him, more or less. It was a little bit more dramatic than that in the moment. Now, in reality, my dad was watching very closely, and wasn't going to make sure it wasn't going to let anything bad happen. He just wanted me to go confront something.
Yeah.
And so I remember being a little kid, like, this is probably really not PC and not something I do with my child these days, I guess. But, this is a Midwest in the 80s, thinking about the things that were impactful. But I remember walking as a little kid with my, fists clenched, tears rolling down my face, and like walking up to this bigger kid and just punching him in the stomach. And he went down, and his older brother ran away to tell on me and all this and that. And eventually the dads talked it out and all was fine. But it was like this moment that I like conquered a fear. And I had a number of other things like that where my dad really instilled some of those things in me, including when I went to England actually to study abroad. At the time, I put all this pressure on myself with grades in school and all that. And it was going to hurt my path towards graduating in 4 years a little bit. Might lead to me needing to take some summer classes 1 year. And I was worried that was too much of a deviation. And my dad had said, like, if you think this is too hard now, you're never going to do it. Like, he's like, it's never going to be easier than now. And I've taken that other places as well. I took that same advice that's never going to be easier than now when I went to left my engineering job to play poker, as well as when I quit being a professional poker player to come to Malta to work at Run It Once. So those are some some very positive advice, I suppose. Maybe not necessarily the punching another child, but yeah.
I guess a challenge is like my dad was exactly the same, yeah. and I have those same memories, that overwhelming fear that you could get battered again, but you have to do this, and otherwise you just can't go home. I mean, I remember my dad saying, "Don't come home," and then I got a 19-year-old, so I taught my 19-year-old to do the same. Now I have a 3-year-old. I would never dream of doing that. And even now with my 19-year-old, in the last, particularly since I gave up drinking, I'm able to parent him differently. The challenge, I guess, Jason, for you is, how do you instill that feel of fear and do it anyway without teaching your kid to go and bash someone? It's difficult.
Yeah, this is a tough one, because I actually, I'm saying this to you partially because of I'm making sure I'm throwing disclaimers out there that I'm not going to tell my daughter to go beat people up because it doesn't seem like the right thing to do. But I actually don't look back on this as a negative in my life at all.
No.
It maybe was a negative in the lives of the kids I punched, I guess, but they punched me first. I don't know. So, any case, I think it was something that was a positive for me. It definitely had some poor side effects, because then I found out later that I had one of my best friends to this day lived on the same block as we were little kids, and apparently he went to a different bus stop after that. Sometime after that, because when kids would pick on my friend, I would punch them, so because I found out I could do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's something that, whatever, a 6-year-old or 7-year-old doesn't know how to handle very well. So there were definitely some negatives there. But any case, I haven't decided how I'm going to do that kind of thing with my daughter. I do know, so there's one thing I've thought a little bit about in terms of what I want to say to her and some others. And I actually heard this from a friend's daughter, because a friend who I went through engineering school with, he taught this to his daughter, and it was, understanding that being brave is being afraid but still doing it. Still following through with that. And I think that is something I can teach her to do, to face fears. even if it doesn't mean, including violence. So probably more in the ways that my dad did it through other words, and maybe not through that one specific thing. One of the things that I maybe didn't get from my parents, is back to your original question, I obviously deviated a bit, that I think is going to be important for me to teach her, is that talent's a huge deal in almost anything in the world. And I think in most things that you'll try and take on, there is going to be some minimum talent level required in order for you to be one of the best, or there's even a minimum talent level for you to even be able to compete at a low level for almost all activities. And it depends on, talent depends on what the activity is, what the talent is, if it's mental acuity, physical, whatever abilities, some things like that. If I'm 5 foot tall, or let's make it 4 feet tall, I'm never going to be a star in the NBA. There's just no way around it, right? But outside of that minimum talent level, like, just the working hard is so much more important. It's just so much more important than talent. Talent matters a lot. It absolutely does, but you really can't ever go that far, I think. Or at least you can't count on it. People get lucky in things, in most activities, or become particularly strong at anything without working really hard. And of course, that's much easier. It's much easier to work hard at something and put a lot of effort into something if you have a huge passion for it. So that's an extension of it as well. The easier thing to say is find your passion, and then don't be lazy. It'll be much easier to not be lazy when you're working on something you're passionate about. But it isn't always easy to find your passion either. And I think it is. It wasn't necessarily. I learned a lot through, like you said, through osmosis, through the example set by my mom, just in how hard she worked at everything. But I don't ever remember any, specific conversations that were along those lines, like that you need to work really hard. And maybe I didn't need that so much as a kid. So maybe that's why they didn't have those. But if anything, I remember the other side, hearing all the time, you can do anything if you, that kind of thing. There was a lot of that kind of mentality that I think is, I know now today people talk about millennials being entitled and stuff because they think they were supposed to be able to do anything, yet they're not really to work for it. I have no opinion on any of that. I just know that being explicit to her about the importance of hard work if you want to accomplish anything is and your ability to compete at whatever it is you're doing, something that I think I'll do my best to instill.
I started having conversation with my 3-year-old. No, you've started this now, so we're going to finish it, and it's really important that you finish it. The problem I had with my 19-year-old is, when it comes to poker and your music, that the passion comes before the need for perseverance. You just fall in love with it, and then the perseverance comes naturally. Some people, just because of the passion, other people have to try hard of it. But it's when your kids, and you would have gone through this as well as a kid, and not everybody would have, I guess, is when you do something that you're not passionate about, but if you don't have that someone driving you with that perseverance, you lose a critical skill in life, or an ability. So like in Malta now, when you transitioned to Malta, when you became a professional poker player, when you was in electrical engineering, when you was in the band, there's going to be a multitude of things you don't want to do, even though you got passion, but you need to do them in order for you to get on. And if you haven't built that skill or that ability, you've got a pretty big leak. So I think you're talking about a really important point in life in general, not just poker,
Yeah, agreed. And it's something that, I have to make sure I think about with my daughter from a young age too, is that you talk about you started something, you got to finish it. And, it's going to be a hard thing to walk the fine line between giving them something that's, somewhat, you don't want to give it advice or have requirements that are kind of nonsensical or, that limit their ability to think outside of the box and think they have to stay within this structured framework. But at the same time, finding a way to instill some follow through in them and, an inherent sense of responsibility is very, very important. And I don't necessarily know where mine came from, but I had it, I think, before I found things I was passionate about. And I assume some of it maybe has to do with being an oldest child or something. I don't know. Something happened to my childhood. I'm not sure. But somehow I decided from a pretty young age that just if I was doing something, I had to do it. And
so you was in school and you were doing really well, getting good grades. What you started to work before poker, right? You're one of the few that worked a job before poker. What did you do?
Yeah, I was a super old guy for for online poker at that time. The demographics have changed a bit now, but in the poker boom at the time, I was a little bit odd because I went to university, got a degree in electrical engineering, had completed partial focus in computer science and similar in entrepreneurship. Took a number of entrepreneurship and kind of business related classes and stuff as well, and did the study abroad thing, and then went to work as an electrical engineer and software engineer. Moved from Grand Forks, North Dakota, to the big city, Minneapolis, Minnesota, to take that job, and I did that for 3 years, and that's when I found poker. So I played in small home games occasionally, in university, but I didn't play online poker at all, and just didn't really care about poker. In fact, I remember my brother and my dad watching. So I graduated high school in 2000, graduated college in 2004, or university. Bouncing back and forth between the U.S. world and the rest of the world, right? Any case, I, I remember my dad and brother at a family reunion watching Moneymaker Main Event and being really into it and watching like 7-card stud and stuff because that was on TV in those days. And they're really trying to figure out how to put poker on ESPN. And I thought it was interesting, but I didn't really get into it that much, even though they were really, really into it, and I just didn't even understand the rules. Fast forward a year and a half later, and I had moved to Minneapolis. Was no longer playing with my band as often. I was just like driving back to Grand Forks for gigs, like once a month or something like that. So I had like a 1-year stretch before the rest of my band and a lot of other friends had moved to Minneapolis, as well as made other friends there. It was just myself and my girlfriend at the time, who's today wife, and I just had more time on my hands than I ever had before because I used to take tons of classes and gig / practice a couple nights a week with the band, and had a very busy social life. Certainly did a fair amount of partying and stuff, university, and just I basically just never slept. It's the way I lived life for a long time. Then all of a sudden, I had a job that I mostly left at the door at that point, and worked 40 hours a week. So I had all this time, and was kind of bored. And I started, watched Greg Raymer win the main event, and some commercial for Party Poker. I tried to go make a deposit on Party Poker, and wasn't able to. And so then I went to Ultimate Bet, which is obviously good and bad memories of Ultimate Bet. But went to UB and tried to make a deposit and still had issues. But basically I had to find the right way to make a deposit and stayed there. And so I started playing in the evenings and wasn't super hooked in the first year. Was a little bit and played some tournaments, and just like my story's kind of boring too for an online pro, in that like most professional poker players, I just ran really hot to start, which the reason that's boring is it happens to like most of us because we stuck with it, and so like very early on, I deposited $40 and never looked back. But I, just played tournaments with ridiculous bankroll requirements. Like I remember taking third in some tournament way too late at night on a weeknight. I had to go to work the next day and won, I don't know, somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500. Took a big chunk of it off and left $600 on so that I could play $100 sit and goes. So obviously I had ridiculous bankroll management, and lost half of it right away, and then dropped down and stuff. But a year later, I ended up taking it a lot more seriously and bought a Hold'em book. Didn't realize I was buying a limit Hold'em book. Bought Small Stakes Hold'em by Sklansky and Ed Miller, maybe somebody else, and read it cover to cover and was going to get into it. And then so I started playing Limit Hold'em there because that was the book I'd read.
Yeah, how many times have we logged on to a Limit Hold'em tournament and I was like, oh man, I'm going to slip my fucking wrist. Before we keep going on with the poker, I just want to bring the music up to the same level. So what was your early musical memories? What was it that got you into music?
Yeah, actually, my dad more than anything. My dad's a ridiculous musician. significantly more talented than I am. I really didn't get that. I fell far from the tree there, I think, when it comes to musical talent. That's one that I worked hard enough to be competent and stuff. And I'm not untalented. I don't want to go too far with it, but my dad's really talented and really, really cares about it. And I actually think, my wife has more natural musical talent than I do, but I'm a lot more practiced. So, in any case, watching him, he always played in bands or a band when I was growing up, and watching that. And I guess by the time you're a teen, and I'm getting into music, because it happens with most teenagers, it just became. I guess it's possible because my dad did it. It was something that seemed it seemed approachable or doable. Would be my best guess. It was just kind of like, hey, I'm interested. Like, I think a whole lot of 14-year-olds say, hey, I want to play electric guitar or whatever, right? And one of the differences, my dad was like, okay, and can teach me a few things, and so that happened. I did play violin before that in grade school. I guess I just had an interest in it. The only reason I played violin compared to guitar or something, or drums or something that would have been a cooler instrument, was when in the grade school I was going to, in fourth grade, you could play violin, cello, or it actually might have just been violin or cello, but whatever. You could play some small subset of stringed instruments, and then by fifth grade you could start the other one. So I just started early and did that for a few years, and then moved on to guitar.
What was the early album when you was a teenager that you used to play all the time, like one of your first?
Yeah, I mean, lots of them. But probably, I mean, some of the most impactful ones for me when I was young teens would have been, and really first started playing guitar, would have been the Nirvana Unplugged album, and then Green Day's Dookie. I was a huge fan of Green Day. Was then like the gateway for me into a whole bunch of other, punk bands. Eventually got into Operation Ivy and Rancid and blah blah blah. Punk, ska punk stuff.
How do you manage? Because you said you said originally poker has that ability to really kind of like grab your heart, like some hot person, that you eventually end up marrying, right? And you said that didn't happen initially, but then I assume you do get into that. You got a passion of music as well. How do the two coexist? Because like I'm interested. Normally, someone who becomes super successful at something is like there's a laser like focus on it. How did you manage that balance?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, music definitely took the backseat to poker when I really got into it. It isn't like I was hooked on poker right away, for sure, but I just didn't really take it particularly seriously, and it was just a fun thing I did on the side with pretty like long breaks of several months at a time. So I mean, I guess you wouldn't say I was completely addicted or completely hooked at that point, but once I really got into learning the game, and it became something that I could clearly improve at, and I guess start keeping score, and start building a bankroll and moving up in stakes and stuff, then I really got into it, especially when I moved back over to big bet. So I played limit hold'em for a stretch and did that. In terms of how it worked with music, I didn't realize this until quite a bit later, but I really wanted to be, and thought I might be, like that it was possible that I could have been a rock star of some sort when I was in college. And I always had some excuses that I was so busy with these other things, so I only ever went so far with that. And I never really took much in the way of lessons at that time. Later in life, I took vocal lessons and things like that, but that was mostly because I had new obligations where I didn't want to be poor, like singing at weddings and stuff, where I didn't want to do a bad job. But it was something I liked the idea of more than had like the real true passion. Like, I loved music, but I loved music, I think, like a whole lot of teenagers love music who never learn more than 3 chords. Yeah. Just the difference is, for some reason, I went a little bit further with it, and I got into bands and had was with the same band for over a decade, and it was a great group of friends, and we had a lot of fun, and there's a lot of talent in the band, and so I don't know, it was something I did, but I never made that my number one, not really even that close. So there maybe wasn't this huge conflict of like, how are you handling multiple passions there? Because it was a passion, but not like poker was for me, and not like Run It Once is for me now.
Yeah.
It was different.
Okay.
It was more like school was, I guess. And,
yeah.
Except, I mean, I liked it more.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah.
I can see that. It's time to remind you that if it wasn't for the support of Run It Once Poker and their incredible CEO, Mr. Jason Senti, we wouldn't have a Hero's Journey podcast. So it's time to give them a shout out. Rio Poker is an online poker room for poker players, created by poker players. And if that appeals to you, then head to once.run/hero play today and you can pick up a 100% welcome bonus up to a ceiling of €600. Now, there are two elements to this deposit bonus that excite me. First, it never expires as long as you play one hand every 30 days. And second, all of your deposits during your first 30 days count towards a bonus. Remember that URL, once.run/hero play. If you want to be the best, then it's not a bad strategy to learn from the best. And this is where Run It Once's training site has your back. Sign up today and you will receive 2 new training videos daily and 3 elite videos, including one from the Michael Jordan of poker himself, Mr. Phil Galfond. The link you're looking for that beautiful offer is once.run/hero learn. There's a movie, I think it's called, it's either called I think it's called Eye in the Sky with Helen Mirren and the guy from Breaking Bad, the poker player. His name's Jesse. Who played Jesse Pinkman?
Jesse, I can't remember his name.
So in this movie, it's literally they're a drone operator, and they're looking at this house and there's terrorists in there with all these death vests and stuff, and so they've been ordered to bomb it, but then they see this little girl playing hula hoop right next to the thing. And in that scene, the movie's about whether or not that little girl's going to get killed or not. And the scriptwriters call this the inciting incident. So in your journey, and we're talking right now about Jason Senti, the hero, the poker player, we'll move on to other things after that. But what was the inciting incident in your life where people, if they were watching it, would be going, is Jason going to make it as a professional poker player? What was the moment where you kind of, the electrical job gets ditched and poker becomes maybe a risk taken there?
Yeah. I think I can probably identify when that moment was for poker. I actually think for me with that one, it's probably less interesting than what the moment would be for, eventually moving to work with Run It Once. But
we'll cover them both.
Yeah, sounds good. The moment for me with that one would have been Christmas of 2007. So I've been working it would be Christmas of 2006. Been working as an electrical engineer for a couple of years. Had been playing poker seriously now for almost a year, but basically the first half of the year was limit hold'em. Then there was a bit of a break, and I took my role offline and did it, used it for some other things. Then I got back started playing big bet with effectively a $200 roll that I got I used points to win a tournament ticket and sold that to have a roll, quote unquote, for 10-cent no limit, because in those days it's, 20 buy-ins was legitimate bankroll management, I guess, at least at small stakes. And that would have been in around end of August or something like that. And UIGA happened that year in October. By then I had enough money online that I, cared about it. It was, a few thousand or something, and had to move money around, was worried about net teller and had to get money off of party poker and all this kind of stuff. But I had been grinding kind of a lot. And then in December of 2006, after putting, a whole lot of time in the previous 4 or 5 months, I decided I had bought a 24-inch Dell monitor used off of Craigslist because tables wouldn't resize at that time. And so it was so I could play more tables, and I'd really gotten into it. And I brought all that home to my parents' house when I took a week and a half off from work for Christmas. And I decided I was just going to grind as much poker as I possibly could on this Christmas break. And during that break, I won, I don't even remember what it was, but it was, between, I think it was like $4,000 or something like that. Right. Playing small stakes no limit. And putting in that many hours, something, approximating what I could do if I were a full-time player, and seeing that I could make something in, I ran very good that week, but seeing that it was at least a reasonable, or it was a possible outcome that I could make something close-ish to what I would make in a month in a week or two. Like, and I was like, this could maybe be a thing. And I don't know how long it'll last, but it really does seem like this is something I could do. And I just loved it. Just couldn't get enough. And it was like, so I, did some really simple math and was like, okay, here's my win rate so far. Like, what happens if I get to these stakes? And as I go up in stakes, my win rate drops by, certain amount. And what do I need to do if I'm I started looking into this was a little bit more over time. My spreadsheet got more and more in depth, but to start it was where I started like getting into what's kind of tax rates am I going to have to expect as a self-employed person. And I read a tax book for professional gamblers before I even went pro. But yeah, I built out the spreadsheet and saw I could see a clear path to where I could play as a professional that I thought had the potential for really high upside in a short opportunity. So I thought what was reasonably likely is if I could hit a certain stage, a certain limit. Basically, I thought if I could consistently or like hit a level where I was pretty confident I was beating 510, my plan was to actually drop down and have a more significant role if I was going to rely on it and pull money off to have for backup living expenses and all this kind of stuff. But I had like a clear goal. If I could hit to this level, I could make this work, and I think I can do it in a way that I'm likely to do better financially for at least a year or two than I would as an engineer. And it's possible if I'm actually really good at this, I could do like way better, And so I thought there was like probably this short window. And I really thought I was only going to play poker professionally for, if I even got to that point, for 2-3 years. But it was that in December in 2006 that it became real. And then I started, projecting out what I could do, and if it were to all work out, and it did end up working out. So
was it a big decision to leave your job? I know when I left my job, it was the biggest decision of my life. I mean, what was it like for you?
Yeah, it was a big deal. And so I didn't leave my job at that point. I worked towards that path. I left my job at the September 2007 after working pretty hard at it and building up a 6 months backup living expenses and all this kind of stuff. And, putting myself in a place that I could go for it. I still think looking back on it, I was maybe even took too much risk with what I went for there, but I was young and it was fine. And it went really, really well. But when I left my job, I was extremely stressed about it. And that was, it's going back to same thing when I went to England. I had my dad in my head saying, it's never going to be easier than now. At the time, I don't think I was engaged, but I was going to be soon. I'd been with the same girl for a long time. I'd bought a house at that point. I'd been a young professional, an electrical engineer, working for 3 years, and was on a certain career path there where I was likely going to head into to marketing or project management, probably both. Was working with a few kind of people there, but who were kind of mentors. I always look back on my engineering time. I enjoyed it, but I always wish I gave it more than I gave it, at the time. But it was hard. I was pretty focused on poker at the same time. So in any case, it was difficult and it was hard because I like the people a lot and they treated me very, very well. And in fact, when I left, I was, given the opportunity to take a leave of absence to start. And within a month, because I had a very, very good month after going pro, which is a nice way to start. To run good, I knew I wasn't going to go back, so I let them know that. But that was a hard decision.
Was there a moment near the beginning when you was going through your plan and all that, where you nearly refused a call, where you just thought, no, my plan, my spreadsheet, there's something, I've missed something, and I'm going to go back to electrical engineering? Was it ever that?
Yeah, I had a whole bunch of moments like that. I had tons of doubt when it came to that. I don't think I have one particular great moment that I can point to where I thought that. Maybe kind of one. I remember going to Vegas for a stretch and met up with a bunch of 2+ tours. The people I talked with then, and wasn't all that many, were guys in the small stakes NL forum that year. And I had, at this point, I graduated to mid stakes and, was shot taking like 5-10 and stuff like that. But I remember talking to some of these guys, and one of them in particular, his online name was Carrot Snake. And he was at least compared to me, a pretty big deal at the time and had been doing well recently. And I remember talking to him about my plan to go pro. And when I told him how much money I had and stuff, he basically was like, "Oh my God, don't quit your job." Like,
Right, right.
you're really like, I don't think you're ready for that. And that actually like did kind of really make me rethink it a little bit. And I think that slowed me down a fair amount. In terms of, probably held me back another 3 months or something, which wasn't a bad thing for me. It actually wouldn't have been bad if I waited even a little bit longer. But I was just so into it at the time. It's just all I could think about was poker. I was just absolutely obsessed, and I was having success. And so I really wanted it to work, and so I went for it. So I don't think I had heaps of moments that really slowed me down there. I had some later as a professional poker player that were like, wow, when, is this time to start looking towards other options and stuff like that. But yeah, on the path there, I felt good.
We'll touch upon those in a minute. What I'm interested in is, where was I going with this? So I want to talk about mentors a little bit. So, they're really obviously, they're important in anybody's journey. But I want to particularly talk about when I met you, which was BlueFire Poker. How did you get involved in BlueFire Poker? So talk about the lead into BlueFire Poker, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. I had gotten to know, I was talking about hanging out with small stakes NL guys and stuff like that. One of the guys I met through that, his name online was Snowbank, is Bill Murphy, who started BlueFire Poker with Phil. And Bill and I had met in person one summer and had gotten to know each other a little bit. Whatever. He and I had gotten to be pretty good friends online and stuff. And he was starting BlueFire Poker with Phil, and they were looking for people to audition. And so I sent in an audition video, and Phil accepted it, which was a pretty big deal to me at the time that, Phil accepted that. I actually had quite a long time before that, when I was really into poker but still playing recreationally, had Phil ran some like heads up online tournament for coaching, and I like took that day or that night, the next day off of work or something, had this whole thing to play this, to like, have a shot at coaching from Phil. And I think they ended up like having to reschedule it or something. Can't remember how it worked, but there was some kind of thing where then it was like, oh, okay, I think the top 2 were supposed to get X and Y amount of coaching. And they were like, oh, turns out we have to reschedule. It's not going to work for some people. And I, amongst a few others, were like, oh man, I set my schedule up for this. So like, okay, cool, we'll run one anyway. And so like, I played like the consolation bracket of that, and actually took second, and that did not come with coaching because they had rescheduled it then. So that was the closest I got to getting to know Phil Galfond at that point. But no, later I just auditioned and ended up being offered something, and I certainly didn't negotiate too hard or anything like that. I had a desire to make training videos. I had been watching Taylor KB, Green Plastic, and Brian Hastings and stuff for a while on Card Runners. Also knew some of I got an offer from one of the other ones, like whichever one Ansky was at, and Poker Savvy Plus, like Matisow, some stuff like that. So there had been, some opportunities, some things came up, but this one was going to be the Phil Galfond version, and so I went for it.
I remember when I found BlueFire Poker, it was when I just decided to quit my job and try to be a professional poker player, and I just Googled the best because I had no clue, the best online poker players in the world, and Phil Galfond's name come up, and then I learned he had a site. So I was reading these self-help books for like, if you want to learn to be the best, learn from the best. So that's how I signed up. Did you? I mean, Phil back. I mean.
And obviously, I remember you from back in those days.
Yeah,
and really funny throwback. This big ugly headset I'm wearing is my BlueFire Poker headset for recording videos. I've dragged this thing around the world like a lunatic for years, like back and forth from Minneapolis to Vancouver when I was commuting there for online poker post Black Friday and all that stuff, and then here to Europe now, and it's what I use for calls with Brownwoods Poker. Probably should upgrade and get some AirPods.
Yeah, maybe.
But this thing it still works well.
When people ask me like who am I inspired, like who's the most person I'm inspired by, obviously loads of people come to mind, but I'll always say David Beckham, right? Like there's something about his work ethic, the way that he handled himself and all that, David Beckham. But when it comes to poker, like Phil Galfond's always like the first name that comes in my head. And maybe it's because I went to BlueFire Poker first. But what I really loved about BlueFire Poker was you saw me. So I'm just like a fucking guy from Ogmore Vale who's losing poker play, hasn't got a clue, really has not got a clue. And I would reach out to you. I would reach out to Newman. I would reach out to Jiggy and Phil, and you would talk to me. You would read my blog posts and interact with me. Like, what was going on there at the early formation of that? Because it seemed to be something quite special. And how have you taken that forward and put that into Run It Once?
Yeah, it was something pretty fun. I was only so involved. I mean, it was very cool to be in on the ground floor. Like I'm pretty sure I was the first coach officially hired. So, kind of coach number 2 or whatever behind Phil. And so I was part of that early group that was Fees, Phil, Dr. Jiggy, Neiman. There was actually a few other, and one in particular, a poker player who dropped out and went somewhere else, who was also somebody I was close with and stuff. And anyway, like, it was pretty cool to be part of that from the beginning and start that. And I think us doing that did have an impact on how invested we were like having this desire to interact directly with everybody. But I know, at least for me, part of that was part of what I was looking to do, in making coaching videos. I wanted to interact with people. Now, a lot of that kind of passion faded as time went on. Like, Black Friday happened, and I, as somebody who spent half his time in the U.S. and half his time traveling, like, that had a pretty negative impact on poker for me and my income at the time as well. And I lost some of that passion for trying to make, good content. I was just doing my best to focus on kind of, I guess, the poker elements. And sometimes it became a little bit more of a job. So, and when that happened, it became pretty clear to me, and I had kind of signed a 3-year contract. Wasn't as strict as that, but that's the way I viewed my commitment from what we put together. And so after 2 years, it became clear to me I wasn't giving that what I should be giving it anymore. And so I gave the 1-year warning that I was going to kind of bow out after that, and did. But in the early days, the first couple of years, I don't know, there was a sense of community amongst that initial group. And, Phil's just Phil. You talk about mentors and things like that, and certainly in various aspects of life, I've had different people who've had major influences on me. I've already talked about my parents quite a bit. When it comes to poker, Phil certainly had the most impact or influence on me and on my game. And one of the things that is just that everybody knows about Phil is how caring and engaging he is. And so he kind of set that up, and I know that's something that's carried through to a much greater degree at Run It Once training, and poker as well, for that matter. But I think that's where a lot of that came from with BlueFire Poker. Phil wanted to make sure we were engaging with everybody, and he led by example there, so it was easy to.
Whatever mentors were important to you in your life? It doesn't have to be poker. But.
Yeah. So in like I said, I think the most influential people who you'd consider mentors for me are parents, and Phil, who, it's weird to say that because he's younger than I am, by a couple of years, but certainly in terms of poker. And he's had a large impact on me outside of that, just as a friend, as, somebody who's as bright of a mind as he is and as good of a person as he is. So, somebody who always has just like such a strong moral compass. And I don't need to ramble on about positive things about Phil. People read enough about those things, but he certainly had a massive impact on me and the way I think about things. One of the other biggest mentors I've had is somebody named Paul Dominski. He's a leadership and actually a mindset coach as well, similar to Elliot Rowe, but he's a leadership coach from the corporate world. And he actually reached out to me many years ago during my BlueFire days, looking for a poker coach, as somebody who, at this point, he's very successful in the corporate world, but was really into poker and wanted to consider transitioning there. And he and I have been friends now for a long time, but he has also been has certainly been a mentor for me. And in terms of in business, which has been the focus, my primary focus outside of course, being friend, father, and husband, but my major professional focus the last 4 years, he's been hands down had the most impact on me and has been kind of my mentor over that time, and even more officially so in the last couple years. First couple years, he was giving me advice, and he also gave me advice to kind of go for this when I started to consider transitioning to run at once poker. But he has been extremely helpful and had a huge impact on me over the last couple years, where he's done it in a more official capacity, been my coach.
In terms of your poker career, and this can extend to life whilst you was a professional poker player, what were the main obstacles that you had to overcome? Was there an all is lost moment where you hit rock bottom? And what was the other question I wanted to tie into that? What was the ceiling that you hit that you just couldn't get beyond?
Yeah, so some challenges. One thing that, this is weird to say, but like one of the strengths and weaknesses for me was that by the time I got into poker, compared to a lot of other people who really got into poker at that time, I was already somewhat of a balanced adult. Of course, I was 25 years old or whatever. Like, what the hell did I know? But I certainly had a different attitude than like the 18-year-olds who were just like living in poker houses with friends and like, just doing this thing and going nuts and keeping score and didn't care about money. By the time I started playing poker, I had a mortgage, at least playing poker seriously. So that was a positive in that I had a pretty balanced life, didn't have tilt issues hardly at all, was happy basically the whole time. Huge advantage in life, right? To be happy and had great friends and hobbies and had a band on and all these things, and golfed and played softball and did all this stuff. That was great, but it also meant I never really went all in poker. Boy, what an accidental, terrible analogy. I didn't mean to use that. But I never really fully immersed myself until a few times with Phil in some moments. A few World Series, a couple tournament series here and there as well, or like stretches. It happened more when I couldn't do all of it from, my home office in Minneapolis. Once I had to travel for some of this stuff, longer stretches at the World Series. Even when I first would go to the World Series pre-Black Friday, I would barely go. I'd go for these 1 week stretches because I was just so much better off being home, you know what I mean? And then coming out and getting refreshed. But later when it became important, and it was like, not that it wasn't important at the World Series, but I didn't put much pressure on myself to do well at anything at the World Series because they were just like, they were flyers that I was taking and I'd go for a few weeks of summer or whatever.
Yeah.
Until after Black Friday, when I had lesser opportunities, it was like, well, if I'm going to do this and I'm going to be away from my life, like I was really going for it all the time. But outside of those moments, I didn't have so many of those. And so I think that was a big challenge for me in terms of putting in the effort that I think I probably should have, or I don't know, the effort that a lot of other people put into it. Not like I didn't put a lot of effort into poker. I did. I cared about it a lot, but I didn't immerse myself in it nearly to the same level as I have even with Run It Once here in the last 4 years. And I think a lot of that is based on location. And it happened more towards the end of my poker career as well because I had to travel and stuff. But being kind of removed from this life that I had before, and it was similar when I first got into poker. I didn't have as many of these other distractions, so I could really just kind of, have that laser focus on one thing. So I think that was a challenge in terms of, I certainly had some low moments, but not, I don't know, none that are particularly interesting. I certainly had spots where I had been on some pretty rough downswings, spots where I, never, I shouldn't say never. I was going to say never huge amounts of net worth in like one session kind of thing, like a lot of people say, but there's kind of one that wasn't very good. We had 25-50 heads up, no limit against somebody who I'm pretty sure to this day was a very bad player. Right. But yeah, he got me pretty good. And so that was probably a bad one. But I was going to say most of it was just like, I had some extended downswings and some bad spots. But huge standout, really, really awful moments, not tons. One of them that actually was pretty tough was just before I made the November 9. Pretty lucky to then bank that. I had started selling action just before that for the first time. I had never sold any action to tournaments when I played them or anything like that. But I had been on a pretty big downswing. A lot of it built on making really bad game selection decisions. I think there were probably pretty darn good things for my poker development, but I was definitely I talk about there was long stretches where I thought I was getting lucky, but I certainly had other times on the other side where I was too confident. And just before the main event that year, that spring was one of those stretches. I decided that, I just was playing anybody who would play me at heads up, 10, 20, and 25, 50 no limit on full tilt. And I was playing Ike and some other people, and I was not nearly as good as they were. I really was overmatched. Not against everybody, but I wasn't as good as I thought I was in that moment. And so that was actually a pretty tough one. I remember being pretty sad selling action, and it's ridiculous looking back on it. I just hadn't done that. And so it was something that just was kind of a new world to me. And then in fact, I sold a little bit of action for Scoop that year, and then I sold some action I played 3. I think I'm messing up this story a little bit, actually, now I'm thinking about it, because I was playing a fair amount of, a good amount of PLO then too. A lot of PLO by the time it was 2010. So I think I'm actually mixing up some of these things, but I know it was in terms of the timeline when I played a lot of, it was playing, most anybody in the lobby at that point. I think actually I'm mixing up from a year previous. But any case, nonetheless, I remember just November 9, it was a little bit of a low moment, but then I got lucky.
You did well. We'll talk about that one in a minute. What about villains? So every hero has a villain. The villain, a series of villains. It doesn't have to be a person. It could be a concept. It can be a belief system. It can be a corporation. What have been the villains in your life that you've had to overcome?
Boy, I don't think I have a good answer for that, which
is life's too good, huh?
No, far from it, man. I've had, I shouldn't say that. Life is good. It very much is. But I just don't have any. I don't have anything that I would consider, a direct villain like that. There certainly are hard things in life and things that you have to work on and overcome, for sure. And certainly I've had plenty of tough moments, but I don't have any sort of thing or one nagging type thing that I would consider, the villain in my life.
How did poker end then? Did you just lose the passion for it, or did you start losing your money?
A little bit of both, but it was, those two things happened as part of it a little bit, but really it was more opportunity with Run It Once. So basically leading up to when I decided to make the move to Malta and work on Run It Once, I had been probably about a year, been thinking pretty seriously about what's next. Now, I had done that a few times before in poker. But I also had stretches where I was like, I might just do this forever. And I still kind of thought that might be the case, but I certainly wasn't. So maybe I shouldn't say like losing my money necessarily, but I wasn't making as much as I was previously. And a huge change with that happened with Black Friday. And a lot of that was actually, maybe you can call this a villain. There we go. I think we found something that's maybe
Black Friday's a villain.
No, not so much Black Friday. Actually, it was I was too hesitant to make a major change in life after Black Friday.
Right.
So, and that basically meant moving. And it was a combination of my wife and I. We were, we had just bought the house that we were going to die in and stuff, and like this whole thing. And we had settled and our lives were there and that was it. We were going to start trying to have kids, and tried for several years to no avail at that point. Actually kind of turned out pretty good for us because we might not have ever moved to Malta, taking that opportunity. And I think I'm very happy that I did. It's hard to know what the other path would have been. But okay, I'll go with that as the villain. I actually think it's a pretty solid one. We really didn't adapt quickly enough in a whole lot of ways. So we did, I was, spending time in Vancouver, a lot of time in Vancouver, commuting, and then eventually spending a fair amount of time in like just crossing the border from where I lived. It was still a long drive, but I switched eventually from like the ridiculously expensive commute to Vancouver to north of the border and played a lot more on the American facing sites and some things like that. But we didn't at the time when Black Friday happened, and I kept reevaluating it every once in a while. I just kept looking at a situation where it's like, okay, my income's going to be cut by whatever, 50, 60%, something like that. But I can handle that, and I really like my life. I think this is a worthwhile trade-off. But it It probably wasn't, looking back on it. I mean, maybe it was. My years as a poker player, I was a very happy person and I had great friends and all these things. But the thing that I've learned since I have moved away from there, that was one of these big fears that we had to face. It was a huge change in our 30s to be like, okay, I guess never mind. We're not going to stay here anymore. We're going to, move overseas and take a shot on a startup. That was a pretty big, scary moment that we had, some things that eased into it. But boy, not long after, and I'm jumping ahead quite a bit in the story, but not long after we had gotten here and really got past all that, I was like, wow, why did we think this would be so hard? Like this, and it really opened up the world to us in a lot of ways, being able, having done that. But so that kind of was the villain there. So as it went with poker, things got a little bit tougher and a little bit tougher as years went on. That's just how things were going with poker anyway. But I made it harder on myself by staying in America and not taking, could have taken that as an opportunity and spent more time with the people who relocated and really worked on my game, but didn't do that. And then kind of the thing that actually made the biggest difference was I was really starting to get pretty concerned about the direction the game was heading in. So I already had kind of this trend that it certainly wasn't consistent, where it was just like each year I made a little bit less money. That's not the way poker usually works.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had some very good years post Black Friday as well, and then some weaker years in there. But it seemed very likely it was heading in that direction, and I had always thought that was going to happen. That it was slowly going to be less and less profitable, and it was this short opportunity. Just went longer than I expected it to. But the game was heading in a direction that not only did I not really like and didn't suit me so well, but yeah, it really it didn't play to my skill set. So as the game was heading in the direction of solvers and basically even studying and skills that I thought, at least at the time, were most important, were more associated with off the table study, because there was now a much clearer path to study. Not that I didn't study before, but it was a lot more ambiguous, and leaning more towards memorization. That's just a gross oversimplification of the use of solvers. And I don't mean to imply at all that there's a bunch of people just memorizing strategies. That's not how it works at all. But it was heading in that direction. And I was also quite concerned about the future of online poker at that time in terms of bots and real-time assistance and all this stuff. So I had been seriously thinking for about a year, what's next for me? Because I kind of, what's next might be go play live, and it might be that, but I couldn't do that where I was living. It might be get into another industry entirely. It might be DFS. I was thinking about that at times. I really enjoyed DFS, but I put a good amount of effort into DFS in early 2016 with success. But then the more I learned about that, I was concerned about the future of DFS too, because the edges were so massive for recreational players didn't stand a chance at winning these big GPPs and stuff that had tons and tons of entries. So I didn't know if that was going to be the right path either. And so I wasn't ready to move on entirely, but I didn't have the same level of passion I had before. Things were trending in the wrong direction, and I was worried about what my future was going to be playing poker. And then I had known that Phil was talking about, just because he and I were friends, he had been working on a poker site, and I actually met with the CEO at that time the year previous, just with Phil, because he and I were playing poker in Vancouver, and we just met and chatted and thought someday it might make sense to be part of this. And Run It Once Poker was really kicking off. They were going to start opening the offices in Malta, et cetera. And there was a position as a poker room manager to be an integral part of putting together the policies for the site that we were going to launch. And it was just a ridiculously exciting opportunity. So while I had a whole lot of reasons to start looking and had been, the reason I actually did it, I might still be playing poker today if that opportunity wasn't there. But that was the thing that got me over the hump. Was I was just way too exciting. This game that I just loved so much, and was sad to see the direction it was going in, and was concerned it probably wasn't going to be the best path forward for me, and that if I stayed on that path, I might find myself in a really bad place in a few years. I didn't really know, or would have to move to live poker or something. Then Run It Once Poker was, it was going to be, I had the opportunity to be a part of putting together a poker room, doing it with Phil, and if things went well, actually have the opportunity to impact the future of the game that I loved so much that I was worried about. Like, if we actually could build something that could draw people and draw players, and we could maintain enough control of the company as people who cared the way we did about the game and about the future of poker, and of course that I knew Phil did, that we could actually have a really major impact. And so it was just too exciting to not seriously consider. And that's when my wife and I had a series of conversations, and just one day we looked at each other. I remember we were both pretty scared about it, but I flew to Vancouver and interviewed with the CEO at the time, and somebody who still works at the company today, and officially got the offer and stuff after, and then went and played the World Series. But I remember sitting there with my wife, and we were looking at each other, and I was just like, I think we have to do this. And she was like, I know, me too. And that's why I'm scared to death, kind of thing. Yeah. And so that was, I really feel, I'm a little bit embarrassed how scared we were to move. But that was kind of the villain. Like, we fought it for so long. And then this time the opportunity was too great, I suppose. And it wasn't like some massive financial opportunity, not at all. I was going to make significantly less money playing, working at Run It Once, than I would if I at least had been playing poker. Of course, I don't know what would have happened. But it seemed like the spot to take a pay cut and to, it had, potentially some long-term major upside if we built something and I was there as, one of the first employees. But it just seemed like too good of an opportunity. It also allowed me to, as somebody who's looking for what's next, to be able to tie together my experience going back to, electrical engineering and even some business school stuff, and, working in the corporate world many years ago, along with almost a decade of professional poker experience, and then be able to bring that together and do something with a group of people that, I knew were just amazing people and would be really fun to work with, between Phil and Dan Quinn, his business partner, and the guys I had met just in the Run It Once lounge at the World Series. It was just too cool of an opportunity. And it's, I think about overcoming that villain, or whatever you want to say. And like, I've heard, as I was talking about this, I thought about something I've heard somebody say before, or I've heard a few times. People say, like, the things they, I'm butchering the quote, sorry, but it's something like, the things that have been the best in their lives have been the hardest things for them to do. And I think some of what that implies from there, that I don't think actually fits with me, that's very much been true for me. Some of the best things in my life were the hardest things to do, but it wasn't because they were hard. It was, the reason I did the really hard thing is because the opportunity was too good, because the upside was too great to avoid, and to keep saying, no, I don't have to do that really hard thing, like, and justify it. And that's kind of what it was in this case.
You use the word embarrassing when it came to moving to Malta, but I actually had chills, like my hair stood on end as you were telling me the story, because I've experienced that. I've experienced the fear of changing your path of least resistance and carving out a new one, and it is terrifying. But you did do it, and it says a lot about your character that you did. What has it been like? Going from like being a professional poker player to like having a job. What's it like in the Run It Once offices at Malta?
Yeah. It's been, moving to Malta in itself was a very unique experience, because Malta's I'm going to use the word unique twice in a row, but Malta's a unique place. It's awesome. We love it here. It's very, very cool. But there was certainly some culture shock to a certain extent. We'd spent plenty of time in Europe, but Malta's pretty unique, and very, very cool. In terms of having a regular job, and I actually remember that was like one of the, that was an interview question with Run It Once, when I was interviewing for Run It Once Poker, and it's a very reasonable one to ask poker players, and I've asked it of several poker players since. But yeah, I was, how are you going to handle having a regular job? And I always had a much more structured schedule than most poker players, so that wasn't a huge change for me. That was another example of things where I sacrificed, earn potential and stuff for lifestyle. And that was that I worked kind of much closer to normal office hours, not all the time, but most of the time, so that I could, have typical, social hours available. So that change wasn't huge. Going to the office every day was definitely a little bit different, especially, part of me regrets that I, am not, don't have I had a work from home job forever when I didn't have children. And then now that I do have a child, I'm away from home quite a bit at the office, not right now because of COVID, but, and that's one thing I wish I was around LC a little bit more, but the office itself, I mean, it's just, we have a ridiculously passionate team. I hope we can maintain the type of staff or enthusiasm and culture that we have at Run It Once as we get bigger. And I know that's pretty hard to do, but so that's made that whole experience just significantly better than I would have expected it to be. Just because day in, day out, I get to work with awesome people who are really fun to be around and care a lot about what we're doing and give it a ton of effort. And it makes the hard parts when, the site has some of its lower moments or whatever things we go through a little bit tougher, but it makes the highs way higher too, because you're happy to be having that success with all these people that you care a lot about, who, also care so much about what it is you're working on. So that's made the being in the office life easy, the being able to work with those people.
And I guess because you're all poker players, fortunately, you know the difference between short-term instant gratification or short-term wobbles and long-term, you need to be in this for the long term. I mean, that helps, right?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And we're certainly not all poker players, but a huge chunk of us are. Definitely. There's a lot of people who are passionate about poker in the company and, former pros and things like that. So yeah, that certainly does help, although it's still pretty easy, even for me as somebody who definitely understands the long term and went through years of variance, to get pretty lost in the short-term variance of some of the results. Because, when you're working really hard at something, especially if you're putting in really long hours and not sleeping enough, that's been a thing I've learned a lot more about myself. And maybe that's because I'm getting older, and maybe it's because I'm doing something different. But
stress, probably.
But sleep matters a lot more than it did when I was 19.
Yeah, you're so passionate about what you're doing, because you're not really if you achieve what you want to achieve and run it once, you're really changing the face of poker. It's not just, it's bigger than that, isn't it? I know you're like, you're not punching up there with the poker stars of the world, but what you want to do, and if you do get there, I mean, it's massive. What's the vibe like in the office during the Galfond challenge, particularly the first one? Are you like,
I really, really wish we could have had the end of the Galfond challenge in the office.
Yeah,
we certainly had the beginning. The vibe in the office when that's going, I mean, not necessarily for everybody, because some people like me are stressed during some of the sessions, making sure people like Run It Once Nick running the show, and a number of other people are pretty involved in a lot of those moments and having to work really hard through them. But a huge chunk of the office gets together, and we've had more moments than just the Galfond challenge like that, like our initial launch day and some other things like that. Our private beta sessions, we're big events at the office that generally happen in the evenings, and the Galfond Challenge does too, because you're in Malta. That stuff's all in the evening, and wow, we put it on the projector and people watch and hang out and have food, and it's very exciting. And yeah, the vibe got a little rough when Phil was as low as he was, especially for the non-poker players. Just because they don't understand, or it's much harder for people to understand who don't play poker that, being down 45 buy-ins isn't a death sentence necessarily. Like, he was never supposed to make the comeback, but you can't draw huge sweeping conclusions from somebody being down 45 buy-ins against a difficult opponent. And even then, it wasn't about the 45 buy-in, being down the 45 buy-ins. When he was down 10, I had, some people who didn't understand poker that much being like, is this going to be okay here? Like, what's going on? So there's a little bit of that, but we got to see a huge chunk of the comeback kind of come through. And then now, even though we're not in the office together, there's, we're all on Slack and communicating through, chats like this and stuff. And it was him making that full comeback was pretty fun to watch.
Well,
it would have been really fun one in the office,
especially because it's personal. Obviously, he wants to get back and do what he loves, but it's a big part of this is Run It Once poker. So there is a part of it. It's like, hang on a minute. If he goes in an insane downswing and loses against Vinny, loses against Bill, which like could happen. There's a million.
Oh, of course it can happen.
At some point it could be. It's he took a break with the Vinny thing, but they could have inconceivably been, we can't do this no more. And so I can imagine now the non-poker.
I don't think there was ever any we can't. I mean, I guess the only way it's can't do it is he pays out all the side bets because all the stuff was locked in, right? Yeah. And I don't. I mean, you saw Phil came back and decided to keep playing, right? Like that guy wasn't going to quit anytime soon. That's just the reality.
That was good as well. I don't know if that was part of the script, but it helps. It's like a story in itself. It's amazing.
No, I mean, like I don't know how much we're supposed to share about Phil's personal life with this kind of stuff, what he was thinking about in those moments, although he's just ridiculously open and transparent, right? But no, I mean, we were in the office, it was stuff like, so who's setting the line? What are the odds Phil's coming back? And I at first thought it wasn't particularly likely, but as a few days went on and talked with him a little bit more, I thought it was more and more likely. And we definitely had some people in the office who were like, "Oh, it's a lock. He's gonna play." And when I mean come back, I don't mean nobody thought he was gonna make the full comeback.
No,
nobody
just come and
understands
play.
poker. Just come play again. Yeah. You call it off and you move on to hopefully an easier opponent. And but it did have we put a lot of plans into the Galfond challenge, and it was something that we expected to be a big event for us for a pretty long time because he has all these challengers lined up. So to start the way he did was it's pretty rough, especially knowing some of the opponents he still had coming, because it wasn't like Venny was going to be the only tough opponent. You know what I mean? Like he's playing a lot of really very strong poker players in there. So it was a little worrisome for a bit there.
So we've followed your journey through from trying to be a rock star, being a professional poker player. You reached in November 9. We didn't cover that too much, but there's a lot out there on that anyway. Now you're at Run It Once, doing some amazing things. So what does a treasure look like for you then at the end of your story? What is it that you're ultimately trying to, your vision? What is your vision in life here?
Yeah, well, the first part's really boring, but it's true. The most important part is, being happy and healthy with my wife and daughter, and being able to provide for them or help put us in a place to be able to, for them to have opportunities, success, and things that make them happy, especially with Elsie. And so that's hands down the most important part to me. What I really want from this whole thing, or the treasure for me, the end goal really is for Run It Once, on a professional side, for Run It Once Poker to have that influence, have that impact that I hope it can. Of course, as I already said, I don't want to be delusional about what we can do. I understand it's relatively small, but poker is something that I've loved for a long time now, and I've been worried about the path it's on, and I think we can at least have some positive impact on that, on keeping at least what was some version of my version of the poker dream. I mean, there are many versions of it and it changes over time, but keeping some of that alive, and providing a great place for people to be able to play poker and have a reasonable influence and have a successful business for all these people who are working really hard on the site, and growing with them in what we're doing. So that would be the dream, that we're just keep grinding away and Run It Once, stay on the path that we're on right now, and hopefully have a good life with family.
Well, I hope it works out for you, Jason. It's been a really pleasure having you as the guest on Hero's Journey. Thanks for joining us.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Lee.